Good afternoon or morning, based on wherever you may be right now. When you are starting a nonprofit, fundraising might look a little bit different than when you are a more mature or larger sized organization. So in this video, I wanted to share just a couple of tips that are specially tailored to nonprofits that are starting up and their fundraising strategy. Welcome back. My name is Amber Melanie Smith. If we haven't met before, I am a nonprofit founder and executive director. I make these videos here on YouTube all about making an impact, whether that is through starting a nonprofit organization, social enterprise, business that is socially responsible, volunteering service, etc., you name it. As always, I hope that you find this video helpful and useful and interesting. Don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to my channel for more content like this. And if you're in the process of starting a nonprofit or developing a fundraising strategy and you find that you could benefit from some more in-depth training, check out my website, founder2fulltime.com, where I have some options for you. When I was first starting my own nonprofit organization, I definitely found developing a fundraising strategy to be one of the most complicated and scary things about the whole process. I mean, many people I know, maybe most people I know, are probably not too excited about the prospect of fundraising because it's just thought of as asking your friends for money. But what I learned is that there's so much more to it, and it's not all, and in fact, not even very much about this actual act of asking people for money. And that if you can get your strategy developed early on in your nonprofit startup development, you are going to save yourself so much time and trouble and be able to scale so much more quickly as an organization. So all that said, let's get into 6 tips for fundraising for nonprofits who are in the startup phase. The first tip that I want to share with you, and this is important for nonprofits of all sizes, but especially for those startup nonprofits, and that is this: know your true costs. Here's what I mean by that. As nonprofits, we sometimes fall into a trap of not clearly communicating what it actually costs us to run a nonprofit organization. And this leads to the consequence of the public thinking that nonprofits don't need as many resources as we actually do, or that certain things cost less than people think. And this has caused this sector-wide trend of nonprofits being underfunded and the public thinking that nonprofits are getting the resources that they need, which we all know is not true. So the first step to being able to clearly communicate your true costs are to know what they are. How do you assess what your organization's true costs may be? Well, the first thing is when you and your board of directors are developing your annual budget, you really want to make sure that you're accounting for everything your organization genuinely needs in order to operate effectively in the following year. And here's what I mean by that. Don't forget your infrastructure and operational costs. Sometimes people call some of these things overhead, and that word has gotten a negative connotation, but it shouldn't. An example might be the cost of electricity for the building that your organization runs in. Well, if your organization is serving people experiencing homelessness or helping animals or helping youth, then electricity is not an unnecessary overhead cost. You literally need the electricity in order to do your mission. So making sure that you are accounting for all of those costs and communicating why it's important for those operational costs to be a part of your budget to your donors. Another example might be insurance or paying for accounting services. Maybe those are thought of as simply administrative costs that have nothing to do with your mission. But I can guarantee you, if the IRS comes knocking at your door saying, hey, you haven't filed your paperwork properly, so we're shutting your nonprofit down, that becomes suddenly very important to your mission. So the lesson here is, don't forget about these costs. Don't think about them later. Think about them now in the startup phase and really do your research and analyze what those costs are. Once you have assessed what all of these true costs are, not just your program costs, but also the administrative stuff we talked about, the insurance, the infrastructure, the staffing you need to do a good job of serving your community, then it's time to be able to practice communicating what those true costs are to the public and to your donors and existing supporters. Given some of the public misconceptions about how nonprofit budgets work and what it costs to run organizations, I get that it could take some extra courage to be able to explain transparently some of these true operational costs that it really requires. But what I've found is that when you are clear and transparent with your donors and explain why you need to cover the cost of that infrastructure, that for the most part, they get it. They understand you can't run a household, metaphorically speaking, without paying for the roof, without paying for the electricity. You might just say, well, I only want to pay for the food that you put in your children's mouths, but without that electricity, there's no food either. So it's not a separate unnecessary cost. You've got to cover these operational costs in order to be able to achieve your mission. The second tip I have for nonprofits in that startup phase is to study and assess all of the different ways that your organization can fundraise. Oftentimes what I hear from people just starting out is an assumption that donations and grants are the either exclusive or primary way to bring in money as a nonprofit organization. But there are actually many, many ways. I actually did a video recently covering 5 of the different ways that nonprofits can generate revenue. Be sure to go check that out to get some more details on those. But you can bring in revenue through donations and grants, but also through earned income, sponsorships, events, and contracts, and so much more. So definitely do your research for that. Now, the third tip I want to share goes right along with that second tip, and that is that not only are there many different ways to bring in money, but there's not a one-size-fits-all solution for every nonprofit. It's really important to understand which fundraising mechanisms are going to be the best fit for your organization's mission, model, community, location, etc. And I cover this a lot more in depth in my online course, actually, over at foundertofulltime.com. One example is fundraising events. Fundraising events might be a really good strategy for small or startup organizations if they can also double as outreach or awareness raising events. And here's why. Events take a large audience and a large donor base in order to do effectively. You've got to have people interested in your event, available the day of the event, willing to pay a ticket price or whatever it costs to participate. That is going to weed out some portion of your supporters. So you've got to have a large enough supporter base so that whatever percent can come to your event is going to make it a good fundraising return on investment. Another example is with grants. Grants are often better suited to organizations with at least a little bit of experience and time under their belts, because grant funders are going to be looking for information about the impacts your organization has already had in order to decide whether or not to give your organization money. So if you're brand new right out the gate, you haven't done much work yet, you haven't accumulated many impacts yet, then your odds of getting a grant might be significantly decreased. The fourth tip that I want to share is what you do before you can start fundraising, and that is to grow your audience first and developing the strategy to grow your audience. Kind of what I was mentioning before about events, it's really the same with all fundraising. You might, as an organization, have 5,000 people on your mailing list, but of those 5,000 people, maybe only a quarter of them are opening your emails. So that's what? 1,250. And then out of those people, maybe only 10 10% are even considering a donation. So that's just over 100 people at that point. So you might have the 5,000, but you're really only counting on maybe 100 people who might be prospective donors. All that is to say, the larger your audience and reach, the more likely you're going to have a larger pool of donors. And for those of you coming from the business world, you know that this is very similar to how you would market your business or do a sales funnel or something like that. So in order to start growing your audience when you're a startup nonprofit, you really want to consider who your target audience is. Who are the people most likely to be interested in your cause? Is it people with children? Is it people who have a dog? Is it people who like to hike and spend time in nature and thus might care about environmental issues? So you want to think about who this target audience is, what group of people or groups of people might be the most likely to care about the particular issue that you are tackling as a nonprofit. And then you want to think about, where are these people going? Where are they located? How can I get in front of them? What are some of the other interests they have? What publications are they reading? What types of social media platforms are they hanging out on, etc.? Another thing you can do to grow your audience is use the power of social capital, which is also considered the power of the social connections of you and your team. So you can do this thing called relationship mapping. You can get together with your board of directors, your leadership team, your core volunteers, and just think about, who do you know out there in the community? Do you have ties to corporations, to the small business community, to restaurants, to other nonprofits, to local government? Basically mapping out, who do you know as a collective team for your nonprofit. And then what you can do is encourage each of your leadership members to invite a handful of people to the very next thing your organization does where interaction is possible. An open house event, a volunteer activity, some kind of festival or meeting or discussion. Basically, you just want to get exposure to as many people as possible through these social connections that you already have. Then there's this whole process of cultivating these relationships, because of course you're probably not going to, and you most likely shouldn't, ask someone that you have just met for money right off the bat. You've got to cultivate the relationships, and you can do this by staying in touch with them regularly. I would say at least once a month through some mechanism. Email, newsletters, on social media, ideally posting way more than once a month, but basically staying in front of them. And once you've cultivated that relationship over multiple months, it is time to make your first ask for financial support. The fifth tip that I'm going to share today is a really great one, and that is to master storytelling. There is just some great research that keeps coming out on fundraising and psychology that talks about how people are far more likely to make a financial contribution or decide to support a cause after they hear an inspiring or compelling story versus after they hear statistics or data. So while I always think it's a good idea to be an expert in the data and research and statistics related to your nonprofit and the issue that it tackles, you should also become an expert storyteller and train your team members to do so as well. To start thinking through how you can be a storyteller for your organization, you want to think about, who does your organization serve? What are their lives like every day? What are some of the barriers or challenges they face in their lives? And very importantly, how does your organization help them overcome those barriers? If you can train your team to ask these questions and answer these questions well, they'll be able to form stories and look for stories as they are doing their work out in the community, and be able to come up with maybe something like a story database that you can call upon when you're making your messaging on your website, social media, or fundraising pitches. I also want to say that it's critical to include a call to action in your stories. You can tell a great story and inspire someone to the point where they're just ready to go help with whatever you need. But if you forget to ask them for that help at the end of the story, you're going to lose that potential and that momentum. So at the end of all of your stories, include just a little bit of information briefly about how they can turn that inspiration into action. Come to this event. Come volunteer with us. Go call your senator or whatever, donate here, including that actual call to action so that they can put that energy into good use for you. The sixth tip that I want to share is to start small and just be patient with the process. It can be hard as a startup nonprofit, and it is very rare that as a new organization, you're going to magically come upon some large donation or very large grant with little effort. It's going to take time. You're going to need to start small and build up and scale from there. Maybe your first fundraising goal is $5,000 and the next time it's $10,000 and you go from there. And suddenly with the right moves on your budget side, you're investing in the infrastructure you need so that you can do more and reach more people and then increase your fundraising goal to 50 or 100,000 or maybe $1 million. But you've got to start somewhere and be patient through that process. All right, I would love to hear from you now. Are you just starting out with fundraising as a nonprofit? What have you tried so far? What's working? What challenges are you facing? Be sure to share in the comments below. And as I mentioned before, if you're looking for some additional resources or trainings, I've got those on my website, foundertofulltime.com. You can check those out. I also do a newsletter for changemakers and nonprofit leaders that I will share the link to subscribe to that below as well. You can join and opt out anytime as well. And finally, I have a Facebook group called Change the World or Bust. We now have over 3,000 people in there from all around the world who are just out there trying to make an impact in their own way, and we'd love for you to join us. So come on by for that. That's all I got for you today. Once again, my name is Amber Melanie Smith, and I hope that you liked this video, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks. Bye.